In 1980, we had the biggest strike in the history of this country. We struck for 41 days and it paralyzed the entire city. 150,000 workers. It was a strike that shook up Brazilian society. It was in this strike that I was arrested. I was in jail 31 days. And that was the year that we had the most fantastic May Day in the history of this country. I was in jail. I couldn't be there. But there were around 50,000 workers in the square. The army arrived and surrounded the workers with trucks, police dogs, everybody armed. General Braga, the commander of the operation, was flying overhead in a helicopter. What happened was very funny. People were in the square. The army surrounded the people, and then more people kept arriving, and they surrounded the army. Soon you had the army in the middle of 150,000 people. The commander saw that if he ordered the military to attack the crowd, there would be a massacre the likes of which this country had never seen. So he decided to retreat. Then the workers cried and sang, and there was a huge march that left the cathedral and went to the soccer stadium where we held our meetings. It was the greatest moment of the Brazilian workers' struggle. From an economic point of view, we didn't gain anything. We lost everything. But in terms of workers' political consciousness, it was the most extraordinary thing that could have happened.
The workers' losses reflected a deepening economic crisis. Oil prices had tripled, triggering a global recession. The world financial community raised interest rates on loans. In Latin America, many countries, including Brazil, found that their foreign debt skyrocketed overnight.
The U.S. had a financial crisis and decided to solve its problems by raising internal interest rates. But then they applied these higher rates to our loans as well. Loans which had been 5 or 7% a year went up. We had to pay 15, even 24%. This difference helped solve the American problem. But since we paid American and European banks, it did brutal damage to our planning. And planning for a nation can't be stopped like a train. Put on the brakes and shh, it stops. It doesn't. The process has to continue.
Brazil decided to continue development by increasing its debt. Brazil should have made a big adjustment, as Korea did in 1980. But Brazil, like the rest of Latin America, didn't do this. Instead, they expanded. Brazil grew by 8% in 79 and 8% in 80. By then, we were very much in debt.
The huge debt forced Brazil into a recession. Incomes, which had doubled in the last decade, now began to drop, and drop precipitously, in the cities and in the countryside. Dona Biu lives with her husband on a small plot of land in the northeast.
Jesus sends us water.
We find a stone where Jesus left a hole. We get on top and clean the dirt out to make a tank to gather water for us.
When they kill a cow, we only hear the news. The rich man eats it, but not the poor. The government said they'd give lots of help. They said there would be many dams, lots of things for us. Poor people were going to be able to plant, have water to drink. Sure, for those who have lots of land. But for those who don't, what can you do? Nothing.
The big mistake was made in 79-80. We wanted to grow when it wasn't possible. This mistake increased our foreign debt from $40 to $60 billion. That's when the debt became a very serious problem for Brazil.
Desperate for dollars to pay the debt, the government pushed exports. Brazil became the world's largest exporter of orange juice and a major soy producer. The government increased arms sales to the Middle East in exchange for oil. Most of the money earned went to pay the staggering interest payments on the debt.
This enormous increase in the interest rate for a country as over-indebted as ours was really tragic. Just after that, Mexico announced it couldn't pay its creditors. Argentina, soon after, did the same. And this created a panic in the international financial system. All the usual credit lines for the underdeveloped countries were cut.
Nearly bankrupt, Brazil was forced to go to the IMF for an emergency loan and began to cut back on spending. People took their discontent into the streets. Five times Brazil signed agreements with the IMF, and 5 times Brazil failed to follow through on its promises. By 1984, after 3 years of economic decline, the military could not stifle the call for democracy. more than 4.5 million people from all political persuasions joined in huge demonstrations calling for diretas já, direct popular presidential elections. The military was demoralized by their failure to stabilize the economy and by the strength of the opposition.
The army was always on the side of the people. Throughout Brazilian history, when we felt the people weren't satisfied, our mission was over. Unfortunately, it was a time of crisis. But despite that, we left because the people didn't want us anymore.
There is some people that say that it ended because the military regime decided to give up power, because they thought that was the moment to get out of government. This is not true. The reason really was that society was fed up of military. And the businessmen that supported the military for many years, they stopped doing that in the end of the 70s. And the beginning of the 80s was the period of transition for this democracy that you have now.
In 1985, the last of the military presidents handed power over to a civilian. For a short time, it seemed that economic recovery was at hand. Brazil had once again begun to grow. The one real worry was now inflation. The new government developed the Cruzado Plan, a daring scheme of price and wage controls, and called on citizens to police prices.
Eu fecho esse supermercado pelo roubo abusivo e extorsivo que está acontecendo com mais de 30 produtos. Estou fechando em nome de José Sarney, o nosso presidente e o presidente da nova república. Está fechado em nome do povo, o novo presidente da...
With the Cruzado Plan, inflation dropped overnight. It seemed as though the civilian government might succeed where the generals had failed. But success was short-lived. As inflation began to creep upwards again, the new democracy was afraid to clamp down and risk unpopularity.
The Cruzado Plan was the first big opportunity that Brazil lost to really finish with inflation. This plan failed because it was very poorly administered, because government was not able to distinguish populism from good economic policy.
With the failure of the Cruzado and other plans, inflation spiraled out of control, topping 1,000% a year.
Você vê, o preço do ovo tá 300 cruzeiros a dúzia.
The price of eggs is over $1 a dozen. When less than a year ago, it was 5 cents. Lettuce is almost 70 cents a head, and before it was 3 cents. You could get a whole basketful for 15. Before you could get oranges by the basketful, and now nothing. How can a couple with more than 2 children survive in a country like this and provide a bit of fresh juice, a little salad?
Como que vai sobreviver? Há ano atrás, o arroz...
A year ago, for a bag of rice, just like this, I paid 38 cents. Now it's over $3. And the salaries are like this, tiny. That's it. That's Brazil for you.
É isso aí, isso é Brasil, né?
Voters hoped for better as they went to the polls in 1989 for the first